So attracting and retaining great staff is probably the single most important and arguably also the most difficult thing that you do as a leader. There isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy or playbook, however. I think it really depends on the specific circumstances of the organization, its resources, its needs. The most important thing is that there is a strategy, is that there's a strategy for how you're going to find the people that you need, how you're going to build and cultivate the team that you need, and that you're going about it in a way that is consistent with the organization's overall strategic objectives. So the idea of an HR strategy may sound daunting, but it really doesn't have to be. The most important thing is that you're just being intentional about it, that you're putting thought into what it is that you as an organization need and how you're best going to go about finding it. So you want to make sure that your hiring process, for example, is filtering for the right attributes or talents or experience, and that you're also not inadvertently filtering out things that are not relevant. So at Fractured Atlas, obviously, we're not sitting on oil wells, right? We don't have some fundamental asset that has value kind of no matter what we do with it, which thereby would give us a certain amount of license to do stupid things. We're a service organization, and like any service organization, and I would include arts organizations in that, the people are the product. That's it. That's all you've got. You've got the people, whether it's the people on stage or the people in the administrative office, it's the people. That's all there is. That's your only asset. That's your only possible source of an advantage in this world. I think my job, though, as the leader of the organization, is to lay out that vision that can be used to recruit people. I've got to be kind of the salesman in chief. I've got to be able to tell a story that's both accurate and persuasive about the organization and where it's headed and what it is that we're trying to do, that's going to get people excited, that's going to make it seem like a place where they can find fulfillment and where they can find enjoyment and stimulation, and where they're going to be challenged and all the rest. So that's kind of my job, and I think that vision or that story, that sense of purpose, is what provides kind of a foundation for the whole organization's culture. First off, I get that it's really hard to compete for staff when you're not able to pay a competitive wage. I've been there. I'm still there. That's a problem throughout the arts, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. However, don't sell yourselves short. There was a recent study that I read about where they sort of polled graduates from Harvard about the ideal career paths and fields that they'd want to work in. And number one on the list was not finance, it wasn't government, it wasn't anything like that. It was the arts. The arts were the number one choice. So, if I were working at a Wall Street bank, I'd be worried about how can I compete with these sexy dance companies or arts organizations that are doing something where the work itself has such intrinsic value and intrinsic interest and passion and excitement and sex appeal. If all I have to compete is a higher salary, I don't know that that's such a great position to be in. So grass is always greener on this one. I think the important thing is playing to your strength, is really finding a way to leverage what it is about your organization, its creative vision, its mission, its purpose in the world, and make that the centerpiece of your recruitment and retention strategy. I don't think there really is a fundamental difference between recruiting and retention at a nonprofit or for-profit. For-profits obviously have some tools in their tool bag that we in the nonprofit sector don't have. They're able to offer stock options or profit sharing, things like that sure. For some people, those are big motivators, and that's hard to compete with in the nonprofit world. Again, I think we need to find a way to play to our strengths and not get too caught up in what we can't offer. So the value and importance of money as a motivator very quickly reaches a point of diminishing returns. Once you're at a place where people are making enough money to have a living wage and to support their family, really each incremental dollar is worth less than the dollar before. So I think it's very easy to get overly caught up in the idea that money is the primary or exclusive motivator in a workplace. In fact, I think there are others that are as important or more. People want to work in an environment where they're excited about the work that they're doing, where they're challenged, where they're stimulated. It's really important that they feel like it's a fair and equitable working environment. If I'm making $100 and the guy next to me is making $50, I feel pretty good. But if I'm making $100 and the guy next to me is making $150, then I'm less happy, even though the dollar amount is the same. So that kind of relative compensation and a sense of fairness and equity, and that people are being treated with dignity and quality is really important, and I think really is a big motivator. And certainly, if you don't have that, it's going to be hard to keep people who are good, because they're going to get burnt out, they're going to get disillusioned, they're going to want to go elsewhere. Another thing I think that really motivates a lot of people is a sense of agency. They want to feel as though they're making a difference, that their personal work plays a role in the organization's overall success, or for that matter, failure. If they feel like they're just a cog and that they don't have any real levers that matter, it's hard to stay motivated under those circumstances. Maintaining a truly equitable compensation schedule, I think it gets harder as you work your way up the org chart, because the skills that you're looking for or that you need are more specific, more unusual, harder to find. You're more likely to have or to need a real special person, a real rock star in one of those roles. So that is tough, and I get Sharon's point that sometimes you need to kind of break out of the pay scale to keep a superstar. But I think you do so at your peril. I think you really need to be careful about that, and really careful about valuing the contribution of any one individual disproportionate to the rest of the team. Because if you have a superstar in a role who maybe does great work, but they bring down the morale and the effectiveness of everybody around them, then their net contribution is not as great as you think it is. I'm still trying to figure out where you can find great people. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think a lot of people make the mistake of hiring people who seem similar to themselves. They look like themselves, they talk like themselves, they have a similar background, whatever it is. That's a human nature thing. It's, we're attracted to the familiar, but there's an obvious danger in that. Actually, there's multiple obvious dangers in that. So I think that's a temptation to avoid, is kind of looking in the usual obvious places, the places where you could be found. Probably you're not going to find what you need there. That's a really difficult question. How do you know when to double down versus cut somebody loose? I think most of the time, if you find yourself asking that question about somebody, the right answer is probably to cut them loose. Usually you'll know if somebody's really a great fit. I think the one exception is when somebody is clearly just in the wrong role, and there's a better place in the organization that's going to suit their personality or their talents better than where they are. And you can sometimes spot that. But I think that's an exception to the rule. I think in general, you know pretty quickly if somebody's going to work out or not. Fundamentally, that's not a human resources problem, it's a time management problem. And I think you just need to recognize that this is really critically important. And so whatever other fires you're fighting, I get it. I know it's urgent and it's important and it needs your attention right now. But in the long run, if you keep paying attention to all that urgent stuff and you don't tend to your own house, you're not going to have an organization all that much longer. So you got to find a way to prioritize it. You got to find a way to think about it strategically and intentionally and to implement systems. I don't think it's something that takes a ton of time and energy on an ongoing basis, but you've got to make the investment of the initial time and attention to make sure you have a plan and you're able to execute on it. So a crisis situation is when all of this is really put to the test, and I think it comes back to something I said earlier, which has to do with the leader's role in creating and selling that narrative for the organization. If there's a strong enough sense of purpose, of shared mission and collective purpose, then your team can weather whatever crisis you're going to face, and you can make it to the other side. But if people feel untethered, if they don't understand what they're doing or why they're doing it, if they don't feel like they're all working towards the same goals, both at a tactical level and at a strategic level, then when that crisis hits, you're going to be in trouble. And that's when things are going to maybe start to fall apart a little bit. So I think that the foundation of a strong culture is never more important than in a crisis. So in sports, you'll sometimes hear people talk about how everything's easy when you're winning, which is true. When things are going really well, when there are no cash flow problems or no crises that are stressing people out in the short term, you've got a little more slack, right? And maybe some weaknesses here and there can be covered up. But when the shit hits the fan, that's when you're really going to find out what you're made of.